Tim Carney disappeared on September 28, 2004. When a person disappears without a trace, often the most critical information is hidden in their actions and words from the days before they vanished. Tim Carney's last known whereabouts may hold the clues to what happened to him. 25-year-old Tim Carney belongs to a religious group that worries his family.
I think they were telling him, we're your family now. You don't need your family. We're your family.
Suddenly, he vanishes on his way to morning prayers, leaving his family searching for clues.
I always wonder if he was trying to warn us about something that was happening.
The Carneys suspect Tim's religious devotion may have played a role in his disappearance.
He would never go this long without calling somebody in our family and saying, I'm okay.
Just when investigators believe Tim may be out of reach, witnesses think they have spotted him.
He seemed very tense and very nervous.
Will detectives be able to find him before it's too late?
If he had to live on the streets, I just don't see him surviving.
"25-year-old Tim Carney has devoted himself to his religious life. For the past 5 years, he's been a member of a small church in New Jersey. Every morning, Tim has the same routine. Before starting his day at the New Jersey Unemployment Office, he wakes up at 5 a.m. and goes to the church's 7 a.m. prayer meeting.
He came home one weekend and said that he had joined a church, and we were glad. We grew up in church, so we thought that was good.
We stressed the fact that religion was an important part of our lives. We believe in God. We went to church every Sunday. I taught Sunday school. Tim was in my class as well as his sisters. So we were happy that religion was still a part of his life.
Tim joins the Gospel Outreach Church, led by Pastor Jim Lethbridge, and soon has a new circle of friends. His sister Megan would come to question the group's appeal.
I think Tim joined Gospel Outreach because they posed themselves as a Christian study group, people that were on his wavelength, you know, really focused on academics.
He didn't say too much, just that he was going to church and we were just happy to hear that, so we left it at that.
Tim surrounds himself primarily with Gospel Outreach members and has been living with fellow congregants since college.
He felt very comfortable there. He felt wanted and loved, and he felt at home.
While Tim had excelled in academics growing up, his bookish nature made it difficult for him to make friends when he was younger.
He was the smart kid, so people shy away from smart kids. He would be talking to adults at 12 years old because nobody else understood him. He was made fun of a lot. He just wanted to feel like he belonged to something, a group.
It was hard. It was very hard because we know he's got a great sense of humor. He's a great kid. They just got to get to know him.
Tim's passion for books eventually inspired him to write his own stories.
Tim started writing at a young age. Because he loved reading so much, it was just natural for him to just try to create his own adventures in writing.
Tim had particularly enjoyed mysteries.
His favorite was Edgar Allan Poe, and he liked to write with the surprise endings. In his briefcase, he had writing. He was writing a book.
Tim was pretty secretive with his writings. Once he felt like something was perfect, then he would share it. But before then, he was pretty protective of his writings. He would keep them in like a briefcase.
Tim could never have known then that his own life would one day become the center of a troubling mystery. On September 28, 2004, an average Tuesday, Tim's day begins as usual. According to his roommate Roy, also a member of Gospel Outreach, Tim wakes at 5 a.m. to go to the 7 a.m. prayer meeting. But on this day, Tim's morning unfolds differently from his normal routine. His fellow church members report that Tim never arrives at morning prayers. Even before his disappearance, Tim's family is uncomfortable with the way Tim makes church activities the central focus of his life.
Whereas before he would come down and join us for church on Sunday as a family, now if he did come down, he had to leave right away to get back to the group. It was more about, you know, I got to get to Bible study, or I have to get to men's group, or I have to get to choir. It was mandatory for him to attend.
Family members worry that Tim's religious commitment is pulling him away from them.
Well, there was a big change in Tim. He didn't come around as often. He was very secretive. He wouldn't communicate with us. And that was tough, because before that, we always had a good communication.
It was just really out of character for him, just not like him to miss the family function or to not call. And it was happening more and more frequently. I didn't like what was happening. I didn't like that he couldn't be with us.
Every time he had to go somewhere, he couldn't go by himself. When my sister was in the hospital, he would come down to see her, but he always had somebody else with him. And they made a statement once where it's like, well, we wanted to make sure there was a real Aunt Kathleen.
Phyllis Carney sensed a pressure on Tim to distance himself from his family.
I think they don't want you to talk to anybody else outside the group, because they always said, well, don't tell anybody about us because they won't understand.
Rick Ross is consulted nationwide by families and law enforcement. He has made a career studying religious groups, including gospel outreach and Pastor Lethbridge.
In my experience, the families that have loved ones in gospel outreach have very limited communication. When a group isolates members, they do that in order to create a kind of bubble. If they can control everything that goes into the mind, they can control the mind itself. So by isolating people from family members, they create an environment in where what the group wants them to think and feel is constantly being reinforced.
I think they were telling them, we're your family now. You don't need your family. We're your family. Well, churches bring people together. They don't tear them apart.
Tim's family notices that his devotion to gospel outreach and to the teachings of Pastor Lethbridge seems to have a physical effect.
He changed his appearance. He always had short hair in college. And one summer when he came home, he had long hair and he had a ponytail. We didn't think much of it. Actually, it looked good on him. But then one Sunday we went and sat in on a church service, and lo and behold, the minister happens to have long hair and a ponytail. And so do several other male members of the group.
But then one day he came home with short hair and surprised me. Then we saw Lethbridge right after that, and Lethbridge had cut his hair.
Gradually, Tim's parents begin to see gospel outreach as very different from the kind of church in which the Carneys had grown up.
We had gotten a phone call from parents who have a son in the group also, and they had some concerns about the church and they wanted to talk to us about it. That's when everything kind of fell into place. Things that we joked about, we thought was kind of funny, but once we started talking to these people, it wasn't funny anymore. It was serious. We know he's a smart boy. We didn't think he'd be sucked into a group that would influence him like they did.
In 2003, the year before Tim disappears, his ties to gospel outreach grow even stronger when he begins seeing a woman who is also a member of the congregation.
He came home and said he was courting. That's the word they used. I said, well, what kind of word is courting? I wasn't, you know, they don't use that word anymore. That's such an old-fashioned term that was a little strange too, I thought.
Tim's family was bewildered by his dating rituals.
They could sit next to one another, but they couldn't hold hands. If they wanted to hold hands, they had to hold a fork. She held the fork halfway, and then he would grab a fork the rest of the way. And that was their way of being with one another. They couldn't touch.
At Tim's college graduation party, His sister Megan noticed that some members of Gospel Outreach seemed to have more conservative customs than other couples she knew.
There was 3 people watching TV, and the couple that was supposed to have been together weren't sitting next to each other on the couch. There was somebody in between them. It seemed like none of the girls could ever be alone with their significant others. There always had to be like a person watching to make sure that they were following the rules.
When his parents bring up what they perceive as the church's strict doctrines, it becomes a source of tension in the family.
We try to avoid talking about the church because then that only goes into an argument, and then we start yelling at one another.
He was constantly trying to prove to us that it was a legitimate group, or it was a good group, or that there was nothing wrong, that everything was fine and happy. I think part of that is that he wouldn't want my mother or my father to worry. But part of that is almost as if maybe deep down he knew that some of the things that they were doing weren't how we were raised or how we grew up.
All the Carneys knew of Gospel Outreach was what they heard from Tim, that it was a Christian fellowship devoted to studying the Bible. Despite his family's concerns about the strict lifestyle that Gospel Outreach seems to require, Phyllis Carney sees Tim's relationship having a positive impact on her son.
Oh, he seemed very happy. He really did. He seemed very, very happy with her. I mean, he brought her to the family Christmas party. If he's happy, then you're happy.
But about 7 months after Tim's relationship begins, the Carneys learned some disappointing news.
One day he just came and said they had broken up, and that's all he would say. Looked like he was upset about it, but he wouldn't talk about it. And that was it.
On Saturday, September 25th, 2004, 5 months after Tim's breakup, he and his sisters Erin and Megan have dinner at their childhood home to celebrate their parents' anniversary.
We just had a nice night, family-wise. We didn't talk about the church at all.
He didn't leave early. He stayed, and he had dinner with us, and we watched a movie after, and it was like, oh, Tim. Being in the moment, just being with the family, just having a good time.
The last thing he did was hug me and say, Mom, I love you. And then he left and went home.
The next day, Sunday, Megan gets together with Tim, but their time is cut short.
We were supposed to go to lunch, but I canceled because I wasn't in a good mood.
Megan sees a potential clue she may have missed, looking back on that day.
He was trying hard to convince me to go out to eat, trying to, get together, and I didn't. I didn't go. It feels awful. I hate so much that I wasn't in a good mood. He wasn't always so insistent to meet for lunch. Like, if we get together, we get together. If we don't, we'll just reschedule. No big deal. But I always wonder if he was trying to tell me something, or maybe warn us about something that was happening that we didn't know about. I always wonder about that.
Tim's request to meet for lunch would echo in Megan's mind. Just 2 days later, on Tuesday, September 28th, Tim never shows up at morning prayers and disappears. Coming up, when police find a clue, Tim's family fears the worst.
We thought foul play.
On Saturday, September 25th, 3 days before he disappears, 25-year-old Tim Carney spends the evening with his family at his parents' home in Edison, New Jersey. As he leaves, Tim hugs his mom goodbye and says he'll see her next week. The following Tuesday, September 28th, Tim gets up at 5 a.m. as usual to go to the Gospel Outreach 7 a.m. morning prayers. But Tim never appears. By 9 a.m., when Tim doesn't show up at the unemployment office where he works as a claims examiner, his coworkers assume Tim is just late. According to his colleagues, this had become common, especially since his breakup. Then, Just after 9 a.m., Tim calls his supervisor to say he'll be late. But by 10 a.m., Tim hasn't arrived. Calls to his home and cell phones only reach his voicemail. The next day, the Carneys get a call every parent dreads.
His roommate Roy called and wanted to know if Tim was at our house because he didn't come home that night. Well, no, he's not here.
We called his cell phone and it just rang. No one picked up.
Alarmed, Phyllis and Ed Carney file a missing persons report with the police in Butler, New Jersey, where Tim lives. When detectives search his home, they find no indication that Tim was leaving for longer than just a normal workday. Detective Colleen Pascal is on the team investigating Tim's case.
Nothing was taken out of his home of importance. If he again intended to go away for lunch, he did not take any of his belongings. His room was intact, his clothes were still there.
Police discover Tim took something with him that at the time seemed normal for him to bring to work, along with his wallet, keys, and cell phone.
We understand that he took the silver briefcase. It's believed that there were writings in that briefcase, which is something that he always carries.
According to investigators, after Tim calls his supervisor around 9 that morning, all outbound activity from his cell phone stops. On Wednesday, September 29th, the day after Tim vanishes, a clue appears.
We received information that somebody had found a wallet.
A patron at the Lyndhurst Diner spots Tim's wallet in the eatery's parking lot. The restaurant is on Route 23, halfway between Tim's apartment and his office. Police learn from the diner's employees that someone matching Tim's description used to eat breakfast there often. Unfortunately, by the time police received the tip about Tim's wallet, it has already been sitting at the diner for several days.
When the wallet was found, they called the phone number that was in his wallet, and his roommate obtained the message, but the message didn't get to the police that day. The police didn't find out about the wallet for quite some time. They could have questioned people a lot sooner instead of quite a few days after.
Police canvass the area around the diner, but find no leads. The wallet still contains Tim's credit cards, leading police to believe this was not a robbery. What's missing also doesn't suggest foul play to Al Schumann, a private investigator hired by the Carney family 6 months after Tim disappears.
Curiously, what was missing from the wallet was nothing except his driver's license and his college identification card.
Since nothing valuable is missing from Tim's wallet, investigators now reason that he may have left it there himself. If so, they need to find out why. Because Tim is an adult, his case centers on one concern. Did he vanish of his own free will, or has he been abducted?
If he chose to be missing on his own, if he just left and did not want to be found, then that in itself is not a crime. He's not a child. He doesn't have to report to his parents where he is.
Three days after Tim vanishes, there's a new development. In Newark, about 35 miles from Tim's home, construction workers discover an abandoned car. When police respond to the scene, they determine that the car belongs to Tim Carney.
When they found this car, we thought foul play. So we were very worried at this point that something terrible had happened to Tim, because they thought, well, maybe they found his body there also. And they said, no, it's just a car. There's no sign of Tim.
Once again, the investigation takes an unfortunate turn. By the time police get the call, it has been almost a week that Tim's car has been at the construction site.
That's where the city of Newark and the city of Elizabeth meet. No one was notified right away about the car because each township felt it was the other township's issue. So it had gone quite a few days without anybody contacting the police regarding it to even notice that, wow, that car belonged to somebody who was declared missing.
The construction site sits on a dirt road off the main highway. It's virtually unreachable by foot.
We didn't know what to think because, like, well, if his car's there, then how did he get out of the spot? It's in a remote spot. It was very far to walk to anywhere.
investigators find little that indicates what may have happened to him.
It had been raining, and so any clues that there were there, whether it's footprints or whatever, were washed away.
No forensics other than his was retained from the vehicle. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence led any of the investigator officers to believe that there was foul play. It appears that the vehicle was just abandoned.
But detectives do notice one thing notably missing from Tim's car.
He always had this briefcase with him, and they didn't find it.
Since police find no sign of foul play from Tim's wallet or car, and the briefcase that had always been by his side is now missing, detectives believe that Tim may have disappeared intentionally. The discovery of Tim's car gives Tim's loved ones some hope, while also raising some unsettling questions.
Why would he ditch the car? I mean, all kinds of thoughts go through your head. It's like, did he get hurt? Did he walk somewhere? What's the next step? Where do you go? Where should we go look? Any bit of hope, you go running to it. You have hope that you'll find him.
Even though the car itself doesn't provide any leads, investigators do find one important clue. The construction site is right by Newark International Airport. Coming up, Tim's family suspects he may be in trouble.
He would never go this long without calling somebody and saying, I'm okay.
Mysterious signs of 25-year-old Tim Carney have been turning up after he disappears on Saturday, September 28, 2004. Tim's wallet is spotted in a parking lot the next day. Then, police find his car in a remote location about 35 miles from his home. There are no signs of foul play, but they do notice that his briefcase is missing. His briefcase, containing his writing, was the one item Tim was known to always keep with him. Since Tim's car is abandoned near Newark International Airport, police reason he may have boarded a flight. Tim's father, Ed Carney, believes that his son could have headed to Canada.
We thought he might have gone to Canada because he knows people in Canada. He speaks French fluently. He had 7 years of it in school.
At the time of Tim's disappearance, a driver's license was sufficient travel documentation for U.S. citizens to enter Canada. Since Tim's driver's license was missing from his wallet, it's possible he could have crossed the border. Phyllis Carney believes her son may have been looking for a way out of what they saw as the restrictive life he led as a member of the Gospel Outreach Church.
If Tim was going to leave the church, I don't think he would have told us. And so I think he might have thought in order to leave the church, this was the way to do it. The pressure might have just gotten to him.
Initially, Tim's family wants to believe their only son will soon return.
We thought maybe he's got to clear his head, and then we'll see him again.
But as the days stretch on, the Carneys also find something troubling in Tim's disappearance. Even if he left of his own free will, they wonder if something may have happened to him.
I just know my brother enough to know that he would never do this to my parents. I mean, we're a pretty close family. He would never go this long without calling somebody in our family and saying, I'm okay.
Ed Carney speaks to Pastor Jim Lethbridge soon after Tim goes missing. Just days later, members of his church and Lethbridge leave for a weekend retreat.
And he told me when they come back, he'll give me the full support of him and the church and looking for Tim. I thought it was odd that they all decided to go away for a weekend and not help me find Tim.
Rick Ross has seen this response to a disappearance with other religious groups.
When there's a group and it's very small, like the Lethbridge group, which has just a handful of members really, and someone important like Tim Carney leaves, who everyone regarded as at one time a loyal and devoted member, it creates doubts in the group. So in order to get a handle on that, a leader may sequester the group and go into a kind of retreat where he or she can then spin the departure of the valued group member for damage control.
Once Gospel Outreach members return from the retreat, the Carneys hope for their support in the search effort.
I specifically called Pastor Lethbridge to request his assistance, and he just was unavailable, and he couldn't be bothered.
They might have known if he was depressed. He was with them more than he was with us. Any one of them could have helped us, but nobody talked to us, nobody called. And that's more disappointing than anything, that nobody wanted to help us.
After private investigator Al Schumann also reaches out to Gospel Outreach members, he says he gets minimal cooperation.
The church members were reluctant to speak. As a matter of fact, they were very curt and abrupt in response.
Then, Ed and Phyllis Carney speak to other parents of Gospel Outreach members. They report learning that Tim's congregation has a very different understanding of his disappearance.
And I was shocked to find out that they're told that Tim's okay.
According to the Carneys, Jim Lethbridge has given his congregation a disturbing account of Tim's disappearance. That Tim is not missing at all, and that his parents know his whereabouts.
He told them we kidnapped our own son.
He just feels that my parents have done something with him, and that, you know, we're hiding him. We're certainly not hiding him. We're trying to bring him home.
Still pursuing the theory that Tim might have boarded a plane, investigators examine travel manifests in the hope of finding Tim's name on a flight out of Newark. Their search comes up empty, as do Al Schumann's inquiries with Canadian authorities.
I contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They said that at that point, border patrols had tightened to the point where they were almost certain that he could not have gone into Canada from the United States without being detected.
But investigators realize that Tim could have found a way to make himself nearly invisible to anyone trying to track him. The search for Tim Carney might be targeting the wrong person.
He could have assumed a new identity due to his employment.
Tim's position at the state unemployment office put dozens of Social Security numbers within his reach, giving him the ability to create an entirely new identity. If Tim did assume another identity, it would be virtually impossible to track him among the thousands of passengers who travel daily through Newark Airport. Phyllis Carney suspects that with a new identity, Tim could easily avoid detection.
He's a very average-looking guy. I mean, he doesn't have blue hair.
Is it possible that Tim, the amateur mystery writer, could have created the ultimate whodunit?
It's like it's a mystery novel without the ending.
Coming up, Tim may be closer to home than his family realizes. Get more Disappeared online at investigation.discovery.com. "25-year-old Tim Carney has gone missing. According to his family, he may have wanted to escape his life in the Gospel Outreach Church, a congregation the Carneys saw as isolating and controlling. Tim's family hears that Gospel Outreach pastor Jim Lethbridge has told his members that Tim has not disappeared at all, and that his parents know where he is. Since Tim had access to countless Social Security numbers through his job at the unemployment office, investigators consider the possibility that he could be traveling under a different identity. Police get a lead that heats up the local search again. Since his disappearance, investigators have been monitoring Tim's bank account and credit cards. For 3 days, the accounts have shown no activity. But suddenly, on the 4th day after Tim goes missing, bank surveillance images reveal a man accessing Tim's checking account.
On October 2nd, there was an image taken of the mail party withdrawing money from his account. He's wearing a baseball cap, and the baseball cap was pulled down very low over his eyes so that you could not see who the individual was. Clearly, the individual is trying to hide themselves from the camera.
The bank is located about 7 miles from the construction site where Tim's car is found abandoned, and about 24 miles from his usual branch. The man in the surveillance image hands the teller a withdrawal slip in the amount of $1,000, just $100 short of the entire balance in Tim's account. When police interview the bank teller, she reports a curious observation. The person making the transaction had a red, splotchy rash all over his hands.
I knew it was him. He had psoriasis starting in high school. I could tell it was him. I could tell it by his hands.
According to his parents, Tim's psoriasis tended to flare up at specific times.
Stress plays a role in it, so that would be something that would tell us that it was Tim.
Detectives show the bank teller photos of Tim, and she identifies him as the man who made the withdrawal. Upon inspecting the withdrawal slip, police discover that it includes Tim's driver's license number as proof of ID. The evidence confirms investigators' belief that it was Tim making the transaction. When authorities check the bank's surveillance images, there is nothing that suggests Tim was being forced to make the withdrawal.
The individual who was there did not appear to be under duress.
But Tim's sister Megan isn't convinced that the man believed to be Tim was acting alone.
There was no parking lot shots to see if he was by himself or with somebody else.
Without his car, it would have taken Tim over 2 hours to walk from the construction site near Newark Airport to the bank. Investigators believe someone may be driving him around. But the question remains, even if Tim is with someone, is he in trouble? Authorities examine Tim's financial history for clues to his disappearance. What they find surprises even those closest to him. Tim had approximately $20,000 in credit card debt, a huge sum for anyone, particularly a civil servant making around $35,000 per year.
He did not have a lavish lifestyle. He lived in a local apartment complex. He drove a basic car.
Oh, we figured he was doing okay. He's got a decent job. He's making a living. He was making ends meet.
Tim was the last person his family would expect to be in debt.
My brother was always good at saving. If he wanted a computer, my parents wouldn't buy it for him. He was always really good about saving to get whatever he wanted. He always had money. He always had some type of emergency fund.
But when authorities investigate his work life, they learn that Tim often borrowed money from his coworkers.
Sometimes he didn't even have the 70 cents tolls to go home with. You know, he'd have to borrow that. He'd borrow money for lunch.
Tim's family suspects that his involvement with gospel outreach may have been a factor in Tim's large debt.
When he joined Gospel Outreach, we started to notice that he didn't have as much money as he did before.
According to police, Gospel Outreach informed them that as a nonprofit organization, it collects annual dues that total about 10% of each member's yearly income. The Carneys believe Tim may have felt pressure to give Gospel Outreach more than just 10%.
He was giving a lot to the church. He got a part-time job also on top of his full-time job.
We didn't realize the income that he had. It just wasn't enough to live on after all that he was giving to the church.
I do believe that he may have had to pay using credit card debt and things like that to remain a part of this congregation.
According to Tim's family, the impact of his contributions to the church was evident.
I just remember a conversation with my mother and my brother. My mother telling him that, you know, he needed new shoes. And I remember my brother getting upset and telling her that you're expected to give 10% or more than 10%. 10% seems to be the minimum that they were expected to give to Gospel Outreach and Pastor Lethbridge.
Still, investigators have no way of knowing whether finances, church-related or otherwise, play any role in Tim's disappearance. With no new information, the search for Tim Carney begins to look bleak.
What makes it disturbing is we have a whole lot of questions, but we don't really have any answers, nor do we have a way to find those answers because there are no leads.
Coming up, witnesses say they've seen Tim. But is it him? And is he in danger?
He seemed very tense and very nervous.
"25-year-old Tim Carney has always loved mystery novels. And after vanishing on September 28, 2004, some evidence suggests that Tim may have written himself into a mystery of his own creation. Police find Tim's wallet and car within 1 week of his disappearance. They establish that neither the wallet nor his car show signs of foul play. Then, a man looking like Tim appears on bank surveillance footage, withdrawing nearly all the money in Tim's checking account. With hopes that Tim might still be nearby, the Carney family works tirelessly to find him.
I was passing out flyers, various businesses and restaurants along Route 23, the corridor where Tim would drive his car to and from work.
About 3 weeks after Tim disappears, the flyers pay off. On October 21st, police receive a call from employees at the Terminal 1 bar. It's about a 10-minute drive from Newark Airport and the construction site where Tim's car was abandoned. They report that somebody matching Tim's description has been seen at the bar in recent weeks. Ignacio Pinto, the owner of Terminal 1 bar, remembers the man on the flyer specifically for what he didn't do.
He never consumed any alcohol, which is one of the reasons that it stood out to me. I mean, being the owner, I'm looking for people to always be drinking. He drank water every time.
Apparently, he also drew attention for being an unusually reserved bar patron.
What I remember about him the most is really the look in his eyes. Like he had a lot of inner turmoil, and he had a lot of stuff that he was just, you know, in his mind that he was thinking about. I mean, most people come to a bar, they come to sort of, you know, let loose, and he was anything but that. His look, his energy was saying, leave me alone. He seemed very tense and very nervous.
If this was Tim, he didn't seem to be a man on the run.
He didn't look like somebody that was homeless. He was fairly well dressed. He wasn't dirty in any way, but he was always dressed the same. Pair of slacks and a button shirt. Sort of office wear. Looking back now, I think he was just killing time more so than anything. I think he probably didn't have any other place to go to, and this was sort of a place for him to spend some time.
Ignacio recalls clearly the last time the Terminal 1 bar had a visit from the man he identifies from the flyer.
We had a problem with him, which I believe was the last time that we saw him here.
After keeping to himself for about 2 weeks, the normally quiet customer shows a sudden change in attitude toward a female bartender when he accuses her of stealing his wallet.
He caused a ruckus because the bartender said, you know, look, you gonna buy a drink or not? And then he accused the bartender of stealing his wallet and just making a scene at the bar.
My bartender wanted him thrown out because he was rude and said something that was inappropriate, and he tried to reach and grab her. And we just asked him to leave. He left. He didn't really put up a fight. He just took off, and we never saw him after that.
The report of this incident leaves the Carney family concerned about Tim.
He's not a confrontational person. He didn't like fighting with his sister. He didn't like fighting with anyone.
That's not the Tim that we know. I don't know if he was doing that to bring attention to himself, that he wanted to be found.
With the unusual sightings of Tim, the Carneys considered the frightening thought that perhaps he might not be able to find his way home.
We were thinking at that point he might have hit his head, and maybe he didn't know who he was. And we went everywhere we could think of, because if something did happen and he didn't know who he was, I'm sure your whole personality changes.
The Carneys continue their search, hoping Tim might still be within reach.
We gathered a team, and every day, every night, there were teams working on different things. One team would go out to homeless shelters or hospitals or supermarkets to put up flyers, and others would go to just local businesses and just people on the street.
Ed Carney believes that despite Tim's education and intellectual strengths, he would be no match for a life on the streets.
He's not streetwise. He would be taken advantage of so easily. If he had to live on the streets, I just don't see him surviving.
2 weeks after Tim Carney vanishes, his family must face a sad reality. Tim is really gone.
We went to go clean out his apartment because his lease, it was up. I think it was particularly difficult for my parents. My sister and I kept having to like reassure them that everything would be okay. It was just stuff. It really didn't matter. What mattered is finding him and bringing him home, not how many shirts he had in his closet or what was on his.
A wealthy entrepreneur.
He was very generous and very giving to the community.
And his closest friend.
A good old country boy. He was like a brother.
Are ruthlessly gunned down.
It had all the hallmarks of an execution.
They would have died almost instantaneously.
Police chased down an elusive killer.
A case like this is like a jigsaw puzzle.
We had no hair, no fingerprints, no DNA left behind. Who had a reason to kill both of these men?
It's a complete whodunit.
Until the case takes a jaw-dropping turn.
Oh my gosh, where's my mother?
She was held at gunpoint, tied into a chair, and held captive there for a few days. They had more firepower than our SWAT team had.
And finds a killer
This just didn't add up.
no one ever suspected.
It was a real shock.
He had, I felt like, 2 different lives.
And then you quickly realize that it was all a lie.
You think it's over, but it's not over.
A killer may have gotten away with murder.
Conway, Arkansas, a small city with southern charm, just outside of Little Rock.
It's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise your kids. You know, not a lot of crime, and it's made that way because of the people that live there.
But on Sunday, May 19th, 2002, police receive a 911 call that shatters the early evening peace.
There's people shot next door. I don't know what the situation is, but some girls came over running to my house like crazy. I said someone had been shot. Everybody had been shot in that house.
Police race to an upscale home in the city's affluent West End.
Patrol officers went inside the residence, saw 2 deceased individuals laying in the foyer. It was clear to them that we've got a double homicide.
Homicide detectives arrive on the scene minutes later.
Once I entered the residence, I saw the 2 victims. Both of them were laying face down in the floor. Their hands were to their side, palms up, and blood had pooled around both of their heads. Based on the coagulation of the body fluids, it appeared that they had been down for quite some time. The first of the 2 victims appeared to be an older gentleman, and he had a folded white towel placed on the back of his head, and there appeared to be a gunshot artifact on the back of the towel. The second victim, the younger man, he had a gunshot wound to the back of the head, and there were white fibers on the back of his head, consistent with the same white towel.
Detectives find no sign of a murder weapon, but something else grabs their attention.
We found a ball cap, and inside that ball cap there was an unspent .45 caliber round. We weren't really sure if that was something that had been purposely left there at the crime scene or if that was done inadvertently.
An extensive search of the house finds no evidence of forced entry.
There were no signs of disturbance and tons of things of value that were still inside the home. Both wallets of the victims were found in the next room. That kind of took away from the idea that this was some sort of robbery or home invasion.
My professional opinion was it had all the hallmarks of an execution.
But if this was an execution, why were the victims targeted? And who were they?
A young lady by the name of Brandy that had discovered the bodies told us who she believed the victims to be. We were able to confirm with photo ID that the older of the two, the homeowner, Carter Elliott, a local businessman. The second victim was a close personal friend of Carter Elliott, Timmy Wayne Robertson of Star City, Arkansas. Brandy indicated that she and Carter were in a relationship, and she knew Timmy Wayne because Timmy Wayne sometimes stayed with Carter.
Brandy agrees to go to the police station for questioning, while police reach out to the families of the two victims to tell them the terrible news.
I was in my apartment, and my mother came over. She said, "Oh, Ashley, I'm so sorry." And I said, "Who died?" And she said, "It's your father." I just crumbled to the ground and felt like I had been punched in my stomach, and all I could do was cry my eyes out. I didn't know what had happened. I just knew he had been shot.
From his humble roots in the tiny city of Helena, Arkansas, to owner of a multi-million-dollar chemical company, Carter Elliott was a self-made success story.
My father was an amazing man. He and my mom got married in El Dorado, Arkansas. My mom was 17 or 18, my dad 20. He didn't go to college, but he's just dedicated and a hard worker and very driven. My dad was really social, and he was a lot of fun. He was like social butterfly. He was just fun to hang out with.
Behind that larger-than-life personality was a man devoted to giving.
He wanted to help people. If you were around him or spent time with him, you were taken care of.
One of the people Carter helped was a young man who Carter met through a family friend.
Timmy Wayne had kind of a rough upbringing, and my dad took care of him the way he took care of everybody that he came across. He was like a brother. He stayed at my dad's house. We celebrated my birthday together. He went to my best friend's wedding. I mean, he was just part of the family.
Now, both Carter and Timmy Wayne are tragically gone. What's left is the mystery of why this happened and who could have done it.
I can't fathom what had happened or transpired to be shot in the back of the head, face down. It's just so unbelievable.
At the house, investigators continue combing the crime scene.
We dusted the house for latent fingerprints. We went through the trash. We're looking for anything in particular that might give us a legitimate lead.
Police also canvass the neighbors, hoping someone can point to a suspect or even when the shootings occurred.
Even though this was a very quiet neighborhood, not a single neighbor heard a gunshot, not a single neighbor heard a disturbance, so it really was quite baffling. We had no firm direction to go in as far as a potential suspect, and nothing that really told us when this potentially could have occurred. Anything was possible. I walked out of that house and I had as many questions as I did before I walked in. There were numerous things that just didn't fit. I needed to find out what was going on.
Coming up, detectives dig deeper.
There's so much that is bizarre.
People suspected some type of romantic relationship.
And discover troubling evidence.
He had a large hook that was in the ceiling.
We found adult diapers.
Before the truth blindsides everyone.
All of a sudden, we had a person that nobody really would suspect.
It sent a shockwave through the community.
I was terrified. I was traumatized.
I don't believe that was an accident.
Hours after discovering the murder of successful businessman Carter Elliott and his close friend Timmy Wayne Robertson, detectives are searching for more clues.
The little evidence we had was at the crime lab, but we had no firm direction to go in as far as a potential suspect.
Detectives bring in Brandy, Carter's girlfriend, who discovered the bodies.
When I investigate a homicide, I look at anybody who has a potential to be upset with the person that would be a motivation to end someone's life over.
If you don't mind me asking, how long have y'all been seeing each other?
I would say probably since last fall.
Are you and he pretty close?
Yeah, we hadn't even had a disagreement.
We also want to know whether or not they had a motive, means, and opportunity to potentially commit the crime themselves.
Would Brandy reveal anything to indicate she might be a suspect?
Trying to establish a timeline here when you last talked to Carter.
Saturday night at about, and I'm estimating, 11, 12 o'clock, I talked to him on the phone. I was in Memphis, Tennessee. He was at home, he said, in Conway.
Brandy says the next day, she and a friend headed to Carter's house when they got back from Memphis.
You know, I just opened the door. And his head is right there at my feet. And I immediately look up and I see another person, and I know exactly who it is. I mean, I see Tim Wayne all the time. I would recognize that body if I couldn't even, you know.
Detectives ask if Brandy knew who might want Carter and Timmy Wayne dead.
Do you have any opinions, ideas?
None.
Anything? Anybody you would suspect? Is there anybody that you can think of that may have had a grudge or was mad with Tim?
Not that I know of.
As detectives pull Brandy's phone records to confirm her story, they receive the results of the autopsy.
The medical examiner's report gave us an idea of a timeline that these two victims were killed late Saturday evening. In the case of Brandy Watkins, we were able to account for the fact that she was in Memphis, Tennessee, at the same time that the murders were committed.
Investigators now have an idea of when Timmy Wayne and Carter were murdered, but the autopsy report also reveals chilling details about how the two men died.
The medical examiner was able to tell us they were both flat on the floor when they were shot.
The autopsy report has one more valuable revelation. The killer used special bullets called Glazer Blue safety slugs.
This particular type of ammunition was a rarity. It is extremely expensive and is extremely devastating.
It is also the same type of bullet found in a hat at the crime scene.
I considered it a huge lead because when we found the offender, if they had a tie to this particular type of ammunition, that would be a good indicator to us that we were on the right track.
Armed with new information, police reach out to those who knew Carter and Timmy Wayne to see who might want either man dead. They start with Carter's ex-wife, Lark, who divorced him 10 years earlier.
Our investigation revealed that their breakup was fairly tumultuous.
But did Carter's ex-wife have any reason to harm him? Detectives bring Lark Elliott in for an interview.
She told us background information about the issues that they had when they were married and the breakup of their marriage.
They had been married for 18 years. I think my mother and father always had a kind of a roller coaster of a relationship. My dad was passionate and he was vocal, and at sometimes you couldn't gauge what was going to happen next. It was not a very fun time to experience.
Lark tells detectives she eventually divorced Carter in 1992. Now living in Salt Lake City, Lark remarried a doctor named Dick Conti.
Dick was a friend of my mother's family. And Dick had gone to medical school with my uncle, and that's kind of how their relationship started.
Lark denies any involvement in Carter's death. And when detectives ask Lark where she was the night of the murders, she says she was over 1,000 miles away in Utah.
We were able to determine based off of phone records and work schedules that she was in Salt Lake City, Utah when these crimes occurred.
With Lark ruled out as a suspect, detectives shift focus to Timmy Wayne Robertson. Was it possible that the 25-year-old friend of Carter was the intended target?
We interviewed the family of Timmy Wayne Robertson, all of Timmy Wayne's close friends, talked to girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, find out if there was anybody in particular that Timmy Wayne had issue with, any fights, any bad breakups, anything that indicated that he was the intended target, but nothing that involved Timmy Wayne just really rose to the level of somebody being mad at him enough to want to hurt him. Everything from an investigative standpoint kept telling us it had to be something to do with Carter Elliott.
Detectives are back to square one. Then they get a crucial tip from someone familiar with Carter's businesses.
We were told about a local businessman that had partnered with Carter in some business ventures. We found out sometimes he would have words with Carter.
Was it possible the two men were killed because someone targeted Carter over a business deal gone bad?
A bad business deal could be a reason to have committed these murders.
Something was going to happen. Something would break. I'm looking for business issues that led to two people being brutally murdered.
Detectives investigating the murders of Timmy Wayne Robertson and Carter Elliott have just received a tip about a possible conflict between Carter and one of his business partners.
Danny Cook was a local businessman that had partnered with Carter. From what we were told, they had had words from time to time regarding the different businesses that they were involved in. We weren't sure at that point in time if this was maybe a business-related dispute or something like that.
Detectives bring the 38-year-old businessman in for an interview and ask about his relationship with Carter Elliott.
In the last 3 or 4 years, we'd actually started some business ventures together. We had quite a few of those together. I always paid all the bills.
We have to look at all of those different businesses that they were involved in, especially when it came to anything that potentially could have led to hard feelings.
Was it possible a disagreement over money between Danny and Carter turned deadly, with Timmy Wayne caught in the crossfire?
I can only imagine what's going through y'all's minds about this.
Potentially every human being on the face of this earth is a suspect.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Right.
Danny dismisses any notion of conflict with Carter.
Well, I'll just tell you this, Carter was my best friend. Everybody's got a best friend. I'm sure y'all have a best friend.
Danny also tells police that the night of the murder, he was at home in bed, nursing an ailing stomach.
I've been in a lot of pain, and in the evenings I take pretty much enough medicine that knocks me out.
Detectives look into Danny Cook and Carter Elliott's business dealings.
We determined that we would seek a search warrant for financial records as far as transactions to see if there were any that would have been outside the norm.
But as investigators look into Carter and Danny's business, they uncover something much more personal about Danny's wife, Carla.
An employee of his suspected that Carter and Carla were having some type of romantic relationship. We had several different people tell us that it was water cooler talk. He was a single guy. He liked the ladies.
If the rumors are true, Danny's jealousy could be a motive for murder. Detectives questioned Carla about her relationship with Carter.
Carla indicated that they kind of flirted with each other, but she considered him more of a brother-type figure than anything else.
Danny also dismisses the rumors of an affair.
Danny Cook indicated that he did not suspect his wife at any point in time of having an inappropriate relationship with Carter.
What's more, both Carla and her son can confirm that Danny was at home in bed at the time of the murders.
Both appeared to have been at home during this period of time.
There was never any real evidence except for could have been. And the law requires that you have something more than mere speculation.
After hitting a dead end with Danny Cook, investigators drilled deep into Carter's life, looking for anyone who could be a possible suspect.
We interviewed business partners, investors, former employees. We interviewed a group of men that gambled with Carter on poker. We went in every conceivable direction, trying to run down every potential motive, and we just kept coming up with nothing.
Detectives still have no solid leads 3 weeks into the investigation. And the failure to identify a suspect is taking its toll on the victims' families.
We were traumatized. Nothing in life is going to prepare you for murder. I don't think that's something you process.
Ashley also worries about her mother, Lark, who has just lost her ex-husband and is now struggling in her second marriage.
I would go back and forth between Utah and Arkansas to be with my mom. She and Dick were going separate ways, and they had broken up.
As the weeks pass, hopes of finding the killer start to fade.
I never like to lose, but it's a complete whodunit. You start to wonder in the back of your mind, is this going to be the case that ultimately I'm not able to solve? I felt like the family of Timmy Wayne Robertson and Carter Elliott's family needed to have that closure. They needed to know what happened.
A killer may have gotten away with murder. That is a huge tragedy for these two men and for these two families.
Then, out of nowhere, a startling development rocks the case.
I had received a phone call that my mom had not shown up for work. My mom goes to work no matter what. I contacted the Salt Lake Police Department, and I asked the police department to go to her house. Her bed was unmade. Her closet was a mess. Things were out of order. Oh my gosh, where's my mother?
One month after Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson are gunned down, Carter's ex-wife, Lark, has disappeared in the middle of the murder investigation. Is she on the run from investigators? Or could she be another victim?
I did not know if my mother was alive. I didn't know what had happened. I had just lost my father. I wanted to know where my mother was.
In a panic, Ashley and her brother reach out to Lark's second husband, Dick Conti, whom she recently divorced. They call him at his cabin home outside of Carson City, Nevada.
I got him on the phone. Dick was crying and just profusely saying, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry."
Ashley wasn't expecting what she heard next.
He had taken my mom as a desperate act in hopes of getting her back. I didn't know what had happened. I just knew he had her. He kidnapped my mom. He allowed us to talk to my mother. My mother was just completely out of it. My mother told me that she was there against her will and he was unstable.
Ashley is afraid of what Dick might do next.
Dick was crying and threatening to kill himself. He was just overwhelmed with emotion. Who knows what Dick was gonna do?
Ashley frantically reaches out to Nevada police.
Ashley was panicked when she called us. She felt that her mother's life was in danger.
Ashley begs police to go to Dick's cabin in the Sierra Mountains, but warns them of Dick's threat of violence.
It's extremely dangerous for our first patrol officers going in. Somebody was on the phone with Dr. Conti trying to calm the situation, keep him calm. He spun this sort of unreal story about how she was a willing participant. This wasn't somebody that had a plan. He was acting more emotionally than he was logically. Eventually, they got him to surrender peacefully.
I was told my mother was safe, and I'm thankful for that.
Lark is rushed to the hospital as a precaution. She tells police how Dick had abducted her.
He had been lying in wait for her, and then she was held at gunpoint, and then he drugged her, putting her in the back of his truck, and drove from Utah back to his cabin. When she woke up, she was tied into a chair and held captive there for a few days. I was sort of surprised that a man that was considered a prominent emergency room physician in our area could do something like this.
Back at the Douglas County Sheriff's Station, Dick Conti says splitting up with Lark pushed him over the edge.
She didn't want to be married anymore. It just literally drove me crazy and devastated me, I guess.
It ultimately took about 5 hours to get the entire story, but he admitted everything that he had done related to the kidnapping and imprisonment of Lark.
I thought that somehow by having her come back to Carson, I could rekindle something that isn't there anymore.
But Dick casually mentions something else about Lark that gets detectives' immediate attention.
She recently had her ex-husband who was murdered. What was his name? Carter Elliott.
Carter Elliott. You know any of the circumstances behind that?
Only what she's told me.
Nevada police contact the Arkansas detectives investigating the murder of Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson.
I reached out to Conway, who confirmed that this was actually a crime that had been committed there.
When detectives hear what has happened to Lark, their investigation takes on new life.
The ex-wife of our victim here in Conway is kidnapped. That was too much of a coincidence, and cops will pretty much tell you that they don't believe in coincidences.
Did Dick have something to do with Carter and Timmy Wayne's death? If he would kidnap his ex-wife, what else could Dick be capable of? Arkansas detectives rush to Nevada to interview Lark's ex-husband.
Have you ever met Carter Elliott?
No. I talked to him twice on the phone when I was at Lark's, just to pick up the phone and say hello.
The detectives asked Dick where he was the night of May 18th, when Carter and Timmy Wayne were murdered.
Do you have a calendar or something I can look at? I think I worked the night of May 15th. I got off and drove to my cabin in Duck Creek, Utah. I know I didn't leave there till the 21st.
Did you talk to anybody that you could think of?
I can't think of anyone that I,
That you recognized or not recognized you?
Yeah.
He seemed very calm, given the situation that he was currently involved in. He came off as wanting to be helpful.
After Dick is charged with the Lark's kidnapping, investigators are eager to search his cabin home for clues.
They were able to get a search warrant to go into Dick Conti's home. Dick Conti had this image that he was a successful emergency room physician. Open the front door, and then you quickly realize.
Detectives investigating the double murder of Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson are executing a search warrant at the cabin of Dick Conti. The Nevada doctor has just been arrested for kidnapping his ex-wife, Lark Elliott, whose first husband was Carter Elliott.
From the outside, it was very picturesque. Once you got inside the cabin, you realized that he lived kind of like a hermit.
It was very dirty. There was evidence that animals had been in and out of the house.
Then, police find something even more disturbing.
Everywhere in that cabin, you could pretty much reach a firearm.
The volume of weaponry we found, it was pretty extraordinary for one person. He had more firepower than our SWAT team had.
That isn't the most troubling discovery detectives make.
He had a large hook that was in the ceiling. We also found that there were hidden video cameras all over the house.
But nothing prepares detectives for what they find next.
Investigators found maps to Conway. He had notes related to Carter Elliott, his address, letters from Dick Conti to Lark that said that he was willing to do anything to get her back, and the books that discussed how to be a silent assassin.
The next discovery is even more damning.
We found blue-tip laser safety slugs, the same type of ammunition that was used to kill both of our victims in Conway.
For Dick Conti to have the same type of ammunition really raised our suspicion that Dick Conti committed these homicides.
As police collect evidence from the cabin to take back to Arkansas, investigators begin to try to answer crucial questions. Did the Nevada doctor execute Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson in cold blood? And if so, why?
Dick Conti, by all reports, was a very competent emergency room physician. You have to stop and question what was the motive.
Detectives sit down with Lark to learn more about her second husband.
I mean, there's so much about him that is bizarre. He had, I felt like, 2 different lives. He portrayed himself to be this, a doctor upstanding in the community, when in fact his other life he had guns, everywhere, weapons everywhere, in his house. And that's not something that I wanted to be a part of, was his other life.
Lark also says Dick wouldn't leave her alone after she left him.
Conti had gone on a campaign. He begged Lark to come back through phone calls and sending her letters and cards. When the little things didn't work, then he would escalate.
Was it possible Dick Conti's obsession with Lark caused him to target her first husband, Carter Elliott?
Did you ever make any statements to anybody about you might consider reconciling with Carter Elliott?
Not to my knowledge.
Did you and Conti ever discuss Carter?
I was planning an engagement party for Ashley, and Carter, Ashley's father, was going to come to the engagement party. So he and I were talking on the phone about the party, and maybe that sparked some kind of jealousy in him, being that he was so possessive or obsessed with me. Maybe Conti's nature was that if I can't have Lark, nobody can have her.
The motive in this case was clear. Dick Conti was willing to do whatever it took to get Lark back. That meant taking out his competition. Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson got in his way.
Dick Conti had a motive for murder, but did he have the opportunity? He denies being in Arkansas that night.
Conti had told us that he was at another cabin that he owned in Duck Creek, Utah.
We were able to put together the last landline call he made at Duck Creek and then the first one he made again on Sunday.
Was that enough time for Conti to have killed 2 men over 1,300 miles away?
We seized his truck and we found adult diapers and a number of gas cans, which would have allowed him to drive to Arkansas back without having to stop for fuel or use the restroom.
We had the right gap in time that gave him enough time to drive to Conway and back.
The theory that Dick Conti is the killer is a compelling one, except for one major complication.
There was no physical evidence that put Dick Conti in that house that night. No hair, no fingerprints, no DNA left behind. And we had not been able to match any of the ballistics from the murder scene to any of the guns found in Dick's cabin.
The odds were stacked against us, but given all the circumstantial evidence that we had, we all believed Conti was responsible for killing these 2 people.
Dick Conti is jailed on kidnapping charges for abducting Lark.
Dick ended up pleading guilty to get a plea bargain. He got maximum time of 15 years for kidnapping my mom.
But prosecutors know that with good behavior, he could be released early. The pressure is on investigators to build a murder case against the doctor before he gets out.
The standard that we have to reach is beyond a reasonable doubt. A case like this is like a jigsaw puzzle. Reasonable doubt slips in pretty quickly.
9 years pass as investigators painstakingly seek out evidence to implicate Conti.
Even though I had been given other assignments, I continued to follow up, even if I had to do it on my own time.
Prosecutors hold off laying charges in hopes of building the strongest case possible. But Conti's release date is approaching.
Could the family handle us going to trial and him being found not guilty? That could happen.
If prosecutors fail, Lark and Ashley fear for what might happen to them if Dick walks free.
Dick murdered my father. He murdered Timmy Wayne. And if he could get to my mom, he's gonna kill her too. I was petrified of Dick. I was convinced that Dick would kill us.
Almost a decade has passed since Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson were brutally gunned down.
That long space of time felt like hell to me. You think it's over, but it's not over because you're just waiting for what's gonna happen next.
The prime suspect, Dr. Dick Conti, has spent the last 9 years in a Nevada prison for kidnapping Carter's ex-wife, Lark. But he's about to be released.
My fear was there was a very good chance that if he was released, he could just disappear.
2 days before Dick is set to go free, prosecutors charge him with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The Nevada doctor is extradited to Arkansas to stand trial.
We had evidence, but unfortunately, a lot of it was circumstantial. You always have a little bit of a knot in your stomach as a prosecutor when you've got a case like this, especially one that's high profile.
But before Dick Conti even steps foot in a courtroom, a surprise witness comes forward.
A cellmate of Dick Conti said that Dick told him that yes, he had killed Carter Elliott, but that we couldn't prove it. And he also said they'll never find the murder weapon. To get information like this is always kind of a double-edged sword. Are they credible? Is a jury going to believe them?
The big thing was making sure that the jury found it credible. And so that meant that They weren't going to get anything in return for their testimony.
At trial, prosecutors present their case to the jury.
Dick Conti was a scorned lover, and that was our theory of the case. You know, he was in love with Lark, and he was willing to do anything he needed to do to keep her. And if that meant that Carter Elliott was a threat, then he had to eliminate the threat. Timmy Wayne Robertson, unfortunately, became a victim as well.
In front of the families of Timmy Wayne Robertson and Carter Elliott, prosecutors reveal how the crime unfolded.
Dick Conti went to the door, dressed in police tactical attire, and yelled, "Police, search warrant." Once they opened the door, he burst in, ordered them to the ground, and then had them place their hands behind their back, placed the folded towels on the back of Timmy Wayne's head, and immediately executed him. And then he turned around and did the same thing to Carter Elliott.
Dick Conti had planned it down to every detail so that he would be certain that the only things that were left at the scene was what he intended to leave at the scene. Some sort of a calling card in the form of an unspent bullet. I don't believe that was an accident.
The jury hears from a host of witnesses, including Lark and Ashley, who testify about Dick's relationship with Lark and how he kidnapped her.
The kidnapping spelled out what kind of motive he had and what he was capable of doing.
The defense argued that with a lack of DNA, with a lack of fingerprints, with a lack of a murder weapon, a case was just merely circumstantial. And they also said that there was no reason for Dick Conti, to commit these crimes.
On January 22nd, 2013, after only 40 minutes of deliberation, Dick Conti is found guilty of 2 counts of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison.
I felt relief. I felt like justice had been served, and I feel like he received the punishment that he deserved.
There was a relief. That there was some level of accountability and justice for the family and for our community, but also justice is a pretty poor substitute for the loss of a loved one.
For Ashley Elliott, the memory of her father and friend are not in how their lives ended, but in how they were lived.
If people think of my dad, I hope they focus on the positive things that he did in his life. He left a legacy behind, which is my brother, and myself, and our children.
There were signs of multiple blows from a heavy object.
This is a sustained, violent assault.
Such a quiet, beautiful village. The fact that there was a murderer on the loose was really scary for people.
4,500 occupants of local homes in the area were questioned. She was well known, well liked, well loved. Very difficult to imagine anyone would target her.
As far as picture-perfect villages go, Bosham in West Sussex is up there with the best of them.
Bosham is a really picturesque, beautiful village. A lot of people from London have their second houses down here, so there's a lot of money down here as well.
It's predominantly a sailing village. A lot of sailing goes on in Bosham. People come from quite a way locally to go sailing in Bosham.
As a quaint coastal town, Bosham attracts its fair share of visitors.
A lot busier in the summer. Loads and loads of people come around to visit the area. But in this area, in the heart of the village, if you like, it's a pretty close-knit community, and people look out for each other, and it's just, it's just quite a typical sort of English village, I'd say.
The demographic is mainly of an elderly nature. There is the Chichester Harbour, which is an area of outstanding natural beauty, where a lot of the locals would go to sail, take lovely strolls and walks along the harbour. Especially in the summer months, it's more attractive for the tourists because of the lovely weather we get here in the south coast.
Crime is so low in Bosom, there are often months with nothing reported.
I remember being told by the police there hadn't been a crime recorded in Bosom for 6 months. So not a robbery, nothing, not a car broken into.
But in a village where everyone knows everyone, when the unthinkable happens, it tears a community apart.
Police are investigating after the body of a woman was found dead in a multi-million-pound property in a Hampshire village. The death is currently being treated as suspicious.
The news broke overnight that a woman was found in a home in Bosom.
The first that I knew that something had happened, there were multiple police cars and ambulances, which in Bosom it's unusual even to see one police car from week to week around the village, so that we obviously knew that something had happened, something had gone on.
At 10 a.m, 5 days after Christmas, Sussex police receive a 999 call to a large rural property in the village.
Police emergency, how can I help you?
The distraught caller reveals there's a woman dead in bed.
Obviously, the paramedics and police were called and they responded. They found a female in bed with clearly significant head injuries where she'd been struck numerous times with a blunt instrument.
The details from the police came in that the lady who had been found had been bludgeoned to death with an object. Her face was smashed in.
And it was clear at that point that this was a murder investigation.
It is quickly established the deceased woman is not the owner of the sumptuous property, as they are away for Christmas. So who is the woman? And who would want her dead?
There was a little bit of panic in the village because this sort of thing doesn't happen in Bosom.
It's such a quiet, beautiful village that the fact that there was a murderer on the loose was really scary for people.
Suddenly there was all this activity going on, lots and lots of police cars and everything. And of course, within no time, everybody knew there had been a murder. And there was a lot of gossiping and guesswork and so on.
As a journalist for the local newspaper at the time, Kelly Wickham was more used to reporting on village fates, but now found herself at the centre of a murder investigation.
Rumours started emerging about who could possibly have committed such a crime in this area. There were many speculations that came about, such as, why was the victim there? She didn't own the property. Where was the property owner?
A woman murdered while house-sitting a property in a seaside village has been named as Valerie Graves. Sussex police said that a post-mortem examination had not yet been carried out, but the woman is believed to have died of head injuries.
She just turned 55 on Christmas Day 2013, 4 days before her death. She originally was from London, had moved to Scotland to set up her home and a business up there, but returned down south to look after her elderly mother Eileen and spend more time with her family. She had 2 children, 2 grandchildren.
She had lived in Scotland for about 10 years and she was a local artist up there.
Police soon established that Valerie was looking after the house over the festive period with her mum, her sister and her sister's partner.
Things I would be considering en route to that particular crime scene would be who did find Valerie and under what circumstances? Who was the last person to see Valerie alive? Was there any sign of any struggle, any sign of any forced entry? If there's no sign of forced entry, then you may start thinking, well, was the premises insecure or is this something that's occurred inside the family home? So was there a dispute that had taken place? So until you've kind of spoken to the family, you can't rule them out, but you can't rule them in as well.
With the identity of their victim now known, police need to establish who would want her dead. Investigators immediately look at the hours leading up to the discovery of her body.
The night of the 29th of December was rather like any other. Normal watching of television. In fact, it was 10 p.m. that Mrs. Graves took her iPad and a book to bed. She was the first to go to bed. She was staying on the ground floor at the back of the house.
We understand in the morning her sister woke up with her partner. Her partner decided to go down to the farm shop to get some breakfast goods. Noticed that the bedroom door was slightly ajar, didn't think anything of it. He went out to the shops. Her sister then went in to check on Valerie and sadly found her clearly deceased in bed.
There were many rumours circulating about why did nobody hear her scream? Was this an inside job? Was there somebody in the house perhaps that knew what had happened? It was a really strange time because a lot of fingers were being pointed in a lot of directions.
Certainly at the beginning, you have to keep a very open mind in relation to what may have happened. And unfortunately, that involves including, were family members involved in this? And so you have to sort of hold them at arm's length to a certain extent, ask them a number of questions in relation to their movements.
Intense questioning of Valerie's family begins.
I do remember conversations about the fact that the family hadn't heard anything upstairs and she was downstairs, and a lot of people were like, well, how did they not hear anything? Was it something to do with the family? Was there more to it than that? It was, obviously people were speculating.
Initial reports into her death reveal a brutal attack.
The injuries to Mrs. Graves were akin to a high-speed head-on collision.
So how could no one in the house have heard anything?
You have that gut feeling. You sense when you're speaking to people, looking at them in the eye, as to whether or not you think they are involved. And obviously, it'll be a very traumatic scene for the family there, and very unlikely that you're going to get crocodile tears under those circumstances. And again, you want to know what sort of relationship the family have with Valerie and why would they want to do that. So I think, whilst you can't rule them out straight away, you get a quick sense of whether or not they're involved.
Speculation and theories about the motive escalate. But as the family is ruled out, suspicion falls on the local villagers.
There was always a slight fear in the back of your mind that it could be someone that you knew in the village and that they might still be on the loose.
The feeling everywhere seemed to be that of panic, worry, apprehension. Nobody could quite believe that somebody could be murdered, especially while sleeping in their own bed over the Christmas period. People just felt unsafe, really. Would this person attack again? Who was next?
In the pretty coastal village of Bosham, news is spreading that artist Valerie Graves has been brutally murdered while house-sitting over Christmas.
I work for some elderly clients that live in Bosham Home, and they were absolutely petrified because they're both in their 80s. The realisation that there's obviously a murderer out there, that the lady had been murdered in her sleep and they didn't know why.
When the details did come out and you realise the sort of the gravity and the viciousness of the attack, it was quite worrying at the time. For a few months, everyone was sort of watching themselves or looking over their shoulders a little bit, thinking, could it be him, could it be her?
With a murder investigation underway, police need to consider who would want to harm Valerie. Due to tides and flooding in the village at that time of year, police believe it's unlikely to have been an opportunist burglar. Meaning one thing, the killer has to be local.
The weather was particularly miserable, lots of local floods going on, and it's not the sort of area that passing traffic would go through. You have to sort of go out of your way to get into Bosham. And so I would imagine over that period, it was almost a kind of a lockdown in that area where the locals would just stay there and no one would come to visit unless it was to visit family and friends.
The area was pretty flooded. Not many visitors would have come to the area at this time of the year. It's Christmas. People would be spending time with their families together. And there was no real need for visitors, so the speculation was it must have been somebody local.
With the community the centre of a major investigation, everyone is a suspect.
The police came knocking on everybody's doors, and literally everybody. I mean, they came with the two, and they would interview each member of the family separately.
Police have several avenues in which to explore.
You'd also want to know who else has access to that address. So we know that the occupiers are away on holiday. A few phone calls could easily establish where they are and whether they had opportunity to get back to the address. But you're also thinking, well, who would do this and why would they do this? You know, Valerie was 55 years of age. She was in bed. She posed no threat to anyone. And so why would somebody do this? And you then start thinking about who lives in the area that could possibly have the motive to do this.
Having ruled out Valerie's family and the owners of the house, who were abroad, Valerie's body is taken for a post-mortem examination. Could this lead provide clues as to the cause of death and the sort of person who would commit such an atrocious crime?
The thing that all post-mortems are looking for is a medical cause of death. Physically, why is this person dead? But the forensic post-mortem also looks at, in more detail, the injuries present, patterns of injury, what the likely implement that may have caused them was, when they may have occurred, and really trying to get a much more clear narrative of the events surrounding this person's death. The expertise is in what sort of weapon was it, how much force was used, have they defended themselves.
The principal injuries were to her head. I'm looking at the pathology report now. There was extreme complexity to the wounds, signs of multiple blows from a heavy object, impossible for the pathologist to determine just how many blows.
It's a physical effort to strike someone multiple times with sufficient force to damage them. It is not an easy task, and it is not something that can be achieved in a second or two. This is a sustained, violent assault.
The injuries that not only cause laceration of the skin, but also complete disruption of the central facial skeleton of the jaw, together with depressed fractures of the skull, with extending fractures to the base of the skull. And there was a patterned injury to the left side of the forehead, showing a semicircle, which, in the pathologist's opinion, would be consistent with the application of force from the round end of a hammer.
If somebody has died as a result of multiple blows with a hammer to the head, it will be clear from the size and shape of the injuries that that is what occurred. The normal head of the hammer is going to leave round to oval lacerations and abrasions when it strikes the body.
Having discovered Valerie was battered to death with a hammer, tragically the post-mortem reveals how she tried to fight off her attacker.
There's a level of defensive injuries sustained to Mrs. Graves. Her left hand that she must have raised above her head to shield her head from the blows revealed extensive bruising to the back of her hand, together with fractures of 2 of the bones of that hand.
Police still cannot believe no one in the house heard the attack, but now they have a new focus. Could the hammer reveal clues as to the perpetrator? And does the killer still have it?
You then have a cursory search around the premises to make sure that the weapon hasn't been left by the offender, because that could yield some forensic opportunities. And then you work your way into the grounds of the premises and bring in sufficient officers to conduct that search, which will include lifting up drains, looking at people's bins, going through people's gardens, and then just increasing out from the crime scene itself in case the offender has taken the weapon with them and then discarded it en route back to wherever they come from.
With the pressure on to find a hammer-wielding killer, local tradespeople are under the spotlight.
When I got interviewed by the police, it's because I was working for my elderly clients, so they'd obviously lived in the area and I worked for them, so they were interviewing everybody that was in the local vicinity. So, you know, they wanted to know exactly what make of hammer that I had in the van, and yeah, it was quite worrying.
And it isn't long before their hunch pays off and police make an announcement.
A man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of an artist who was found dead at a property she was house-sitting over the Christmas period.
He lived very close to the scene of the crime, together with the fact that his occupation was manual, he was a labourer, may well have led the police to arrest him.
With a man being questioned, police continue to build their case and look for evidence.
They'll also be doing other forensic examinations within the crime scene, so there will be a number of fingerprints, for example, that may turn up within the house that are alien to that address. But it could be a window cleaner, it could be somebody who's done work in that address previously. And so these inquiries need to be bottomed out. And sometimes if you get a fingerprint of an individual together with an account that cannot be corroborated and they're not alibied, then that will give sufficient grounds for the police to arrest that individual and put further questions to them under caution.
The arrested man is interviewed extensively by police.
Despite the fact he spent some time in police custody, he was fully exonerated.
Police are back to square one. But then a discovery is made.
A weapon was found about 600 metres away from the home. It was that of a red claw hammer.
The finding of the hammer was absolutely crucial. It had the blood of Mrs. Graves on it, and therefore was the murder weapon.
And the hammer itself had been exposed to the elements for a couple of days, which means the opportunity to yield forensic evidence is reducing daily. But that said, the scientists were able to yield a DNA profile confirming Valerie's DNA. And then what the scientists also found was a very small partial DNA, and all they could say was that it related to a male individual.
Police now believe for certain Valerie's killer was male. Who is he? And why would he want Valerie dead? Investigations ramp up a notch and the search for the owner of the hammer begins.
The hammer was a 16-ounce forged steel claw hammer, the sort of hammer you'd find from any DIY store. But to show the depth of the police investigation, they contacted Screwfix, who are the company who manufactured this hammer, and then trawled through the records of those suppliers who had sold this type of hammer and then tried to eliminate purchasers from their inquiries.
The risks around having a partial profile is obviously you don't know who it belongs to, and actually it could be an innocent profile. So it could have been, the shopkeeper that sold that hammer. It could be their profile. It could be somebody who's borrowed that hammer. So it may not necessarily link to the murderer, but at least it gives you an idea as to who you want to speak to that may have had contact with that hammer, and then that can then lead on to further inquiries.
With a partial DNA profile on the hammer, every male in the surrounding area is suddenly the focus of police attention.
The next step then is to start looking at males within the area, matching a certain criteria, who they're then going to ask to come forward and voluntarily give their DNA. It's a very expensive and time-consuming process.
Everybody was asked to come and volunteer, including people such as the postman, people that live nearby, anybody in the area.
They set up a mass DNA screening process where they asked local men from the age of 17 and upwards to come to a location, bring their ID with them, give them a thumbprint, and then offer a DNA sample that can then be checked against the partial male DNA profile that the police already had, so that they could either be ruled in or ruled out of that investigation.
So the response locally was outstanding because there was a joint desire in this small village town of Bosom that they wanted a culprit caught, not just, of course, for Mrs. Graves and her friends and family, but because they had, on the face of it, a very dangerous man out loose.
There was DNA testing stations set up around the village. Myself and a few friends, and there's loads of us all went to, everyone that I know of went and got tested. I don't think anyone refused or didn't go. I think it was the sort of thing that actually, do you know what, if you haven't got anything to hide, then you've got no problem going and doing a DNA test.
Months of DNA screening takes place in Bosham and the surrounding villages.
So the police will do all they can to try and detect this crime. You know, they need to do this for the family, but also to reassure the community that there isn't somebody dangerous still out and about. So they'll be undertaking all sorts of inquiries. The forensic searches alone will take, many weeks, if not months. And then with those samples will take many more months to then try and establish whether any DNA can be taken from those samples.
But as time ticks away, the hunt for Valerie's killer goes cold.
The police were at a loss. There were no new leads. Nobody had come forward with any more information.
5 years after her murder, Valerie's family, the police, and the villagers of Bosham are left fearing her killer will never be found.
So they were mystified, absolutely mystified. Who could have wanted this lady harm?
It's 5 years since the murder of Valerie Graves in the quaint coastal resort of Bosham in West Sussex, and police are no nearer to a suspect or a motive.
At first we thought there might be a quick outcome to solving the crime because it's quite a heinous crime, but there was nothing at all for weeks and then months and then ultimately years.
Having found a partial DNA profile of a male on a hammer believed to be the murder weapon, police have spread their net around the surrounding villages in the hunt for a suspect.
It led to thousands of hours of police work. 4,500 occupants of local homes in the area were questioned. 600 statements were taken. 3,059 males were eliminated by large-scale DNA screening.
In December 2018, I had a statement from the police renewing their appeal to find Valerie's murderer 5 years on. It was a really good statement. They were offering a substantial reward for any information at all. So for me, this was my front page story for that week. It was Christmas. It was a quiet news week anyway. And this was a real heartfelt story that I felt people needed to read about, even at this time. It might just jog someone's memory. It might just nudge them to remembering something that perhaps they felt was insignificant, but that would help police lead to an arrest at last and help the family put this to bed at last.
The police can't solve this on their own. They do need the assistance of the community, and quite often they will use the media to support them with that. Sadly, at times we have to offer a financial incentive for people to come forward, so it's not unusual for a reward to be put up for information that would lead to the arrest and prosecution of the offender. But you hope in cases like this that really do trouble the community that, somebody, if they had information, they would come forward and they wouldn't be motivated by money.
With no clues as to who killed Valerie, police take a step back and re-examine the moments leading to her death. The attack had been so ferocious, so how had no one in the house heard a thing?
So this was a large house. Her sister and her mother and her sister's partner were sleeping in bedrooms upstairs. Valerie was sleeping downstairs in a ground floor bedroom where there were patio doors that then led on to the back garden. At that point, we know that somebody then entered those patio doors and then sadly, brutally murdered her with a blunt instrument.
Police dig a little deeper into their victim.
The profile of Valerie Graves did surprise us all as a victim. She was just an ordinary person, for as far as we know, had no reason to be murdered in such a way or at all.
Valerie had spent a few days looking after the sumptuous property off Smugglers Lane with her sister, sister's partner, and her mum. And December 29th, 2013 was a quiet night in.
We know that Valerie and her family were in the house. They pretty much stayed in that evening to watch TV, as most families do. I think they were probably getting tired of the Christmas period. You know, Christmas had followed, birthday celebration had taken place, and it was a normal evening. So they'd all watched TV, and then by about 10 o'clock that evening, they all put themselves to bed.
Mrs. Graves was found by her sister the following morning. Initially, she thought that her sister was sleeping in. She shouted out, her door was slightly ajar, the door to her bedroom, and there was no response. She thought perhaps she was lying in. And it was only later when she went in through that door, she saw Mrs. Graves' legs sticking out under the duvet and realised that she was cold. And in panic, of course, naturally, she then rang the police.
Was this a planned murder? Had Valerie been targeted?
For me, there would be a number of hypotheses. The first one is that this was possibly a family member. You know, there'd been a dispute that evening and things had got out of hand and, you know, and unfortunately, Valerie's been assaulted. Another hypothesis is that she was targeted, but you then think, well, who would know she was there? This isn't her home address, so is she under surveillance by somebody? Is there a relationship that's gone wrong in the past that somebody is looking to assault and injure Valerie?
Well, the police found it extremely difficult to ascertain why someone would attack Mrs. Graves. She was well known, well liked, well loved, and they found it very difficult to imagine anyone would target her.
Police had already ruled out Valerie's distraught family and find nothing in her background which could suggest someone holds a grudge against her.
They thought, perhaps naturally, that it was a case of mistaken identity, an attacker wanting to seek vengeance on someone for some reason.
The people that owned the house, there were all sorts of rumours that went round about them, and hitman men and all sorts of silly rumours.
Rumours even spread that the house had been advertised on a site for swingers wanting sex parties, and that the family had been there at the wrong time.
There was a lot of wild rumour and speculation at the time. Some of it completely untrue, some of it perhaps a little bit more close to the truth.
But with no real clues coming forward, police home in on one explanation.
Some of these villages, people are of the mindset they don't have to lock their doors, whereas if you live in a city centre, you're probably more likely to do that. Was this an opportunist burglar who just happened to be in the area? Again, unlikely, I would have thought, because it's such a remote location. And therefore, was it a burglar who knew exactly what they were going for? Because they knew that the occupants were away.
Police now believe Valerie's murder was the result of a burglary gone wrong, and that the burglar knew the owners were due to be away. But even that theory throws up questions.
What seemed rather peculiar was that if it was a burglary, why was nothing taken? Seems rather a lot of effort and savagery, for want of a better word, to then leave empty-handed. So they were mystified, absolutely mystified.
Having already tested thousands of locals for their DNA and come up blank, and despite offering a reward for information leading to an arrest, police are still no closer to a suspect. And then, everything changes.
On the 10th of July 2019, Christian Sabu was arrested at his home address in Romania. He was asked whether he'd killed Valerie Graves.
But who is Christian Sabu? And what would he know about such a brutal and bloody murder all those years ago? 5.5 years after the brutal murder of grandmother Valerie Graves in the village of Bosham, West Sussex, there's been a development.
The police got in touch with us in July 2019 to let us know that an arrest had been made for Valerie's murder. This came as a huge shock to everybody. It seemed to come out of nowhere at all.
Hearing the name Valerie Graves come up again in the news was quite a shock, and yeah, hearing that they'd made an arrest.
The man is 28-year-old Christian Sabu. But what had led to an arrest of a man in Romania so long after the murder?
Years had passed since the brutal murder of Valerie, and the police finally had a breakthrough in that they had been contacted by email by a lady in Transylvania, in Romania, indicating that her husband was responsible for the murder.
But who is he? Did he kill Valerie, and why?
What the police have managed to establish is back in 2013, Christian Sabu had moved from Romania over to England and was living in a caravan on the A27 in West Sussex, very close to Bosham. Some suggestion he was looking for work, may have done a bit of scrap metal dealing, but also some local odd jobs as well in the area.
Christian Sabu left the UK and went back to Romania. That is where he lived with his partner, had a child, lived a normal, as it turns out, law-abiding life.
But 5 years later, Christian Sabu's partner and mother of his 2 children tips off police that her husband is the killer.
When the police receive information like this, you have to be very cautious in the first instance. You have to question what the motive is for this female to come forward and say that Christian Sabu was responsible for the murder. I understand they were going through some matrimonial difficulties at that time. So, was her motive to try and, get him into trouble when perhaps he may have been an innocent person?
His wife had seen on Google that he'd been searching about the murder.
He'd been checking out the reporting of the Valerie Graves murder in Bosham back in 2013. And at that time, her and her husband were living just down the road on the A27 in West Sussex.
And she recognised the hammer that he'd been looking at. And she confronted him and asked him, isn't this the hammer that you had in England?
But reporting her suspicions to police is not enough to arrest Christian Sabu for murder. They need irrefutable proof to secure a European arrest warrant to bring him back to the UK. Focus turns back to the hammer found discarded near the crime scene. Could this now hold the key to solving the case?
What the police did have was this partial male DNA profile, which could either implicate or eliminate Christian Sabu very, very easily if we had his DNA.
But Christian Sabu appears to have lived a crime-free life. His DNA is not on the UK or European police database, so they turned to his partner for help.
The police had to think long and hard as to how were they going to get a DNA sample from Christian Sabu without alerting him, because if we do alert him, then, without arresting him, he could disappear and then we may never catch him. And so what they asked for through the Romanian police and Christian Sabu's wife was to get DNA samples from his 2 children, which could then show a familial link to the partial DNA profile. And that's what they did.
And the results changed the course of the now cold murder investigation.
It came back as a likeliness that the partial DNA profile that they had found on the hammer was linked to Christian Sabu.
And then, of course, under a European arrest warrant, to bring Mr. Sabu, to his credit, without any fuss, he didn't object, he cooperated fully, and he was then brought to England.
I felt really sorry for his wife. Finding out this news must have been really horrific. This is someone that she's been married to for some time. She has children with. It must have been a real devastating blow to her. She must have feared for her own safety and for her children. I can't imagine what was going through her mind at the time. It must have been really horrible. And I imagine she was probably torn as well. This is the man that she's married to, that she no doubt loves. And she's probably in a really difficult situation.
On 19th July 2019, Christian Sabu is extradited to the UK.
The feeling in the village and the surrounding areas was just pure relief. People felt like at last this had been solved.
Sabu appears at Brighton Magistrates Court, charged with the murder of Valerie Graves.
Mr. Sabu presented as a thoroughly normal man. Uncomplicated. He was uncomplicated from the moment I met him. He was quiet. He wasn't a man of many words, though of course we had an interpreter. He still was not a man who spoke much. He was still, I thought, even with all the years, he was 22 at the time of the incident, 28 when I met him. He was still in shock. That was my belief about what had happened. He couldn't explain it to himself. And he was remorseful.
The man standing before court is at odds with the description of such a brutal killing.
He basically admitted the crime. He said that, he had little money. He was aware of the house. He knew that there were valuables inside that house. And more importantly, he knew that the owners were away over the Christmas period. So when he broke in, he was surprised to see Valerie, who confronted him. He had the hammer in his possession, and sadly, he then beat her with that hammer.
In November 2019, Christian Sabu takes the stand at Lewes Crown Court.
It was always the intention that he would be pleading guilty to the murder of Mrs. Graves.
He did say that he felt bad about it. He didn't mean to hurt her. He told the court how he had something to drink, cycled to the property in the belief that the property was empty. He'd gone there to burgle the place effectively, and he was shocked to find Valerie there. He said that he panicked, and that's when the attack took place. He said that he'd never meant to hurt her.
What remains perhaps a mystery to this day is why Mr. Sabu, on realizing that there was someone in that room and in the house, simply didn't turn and leave. But he did strike her several times with extreme force. And I think only he will know what was going through his mind, but clearly full of panic. Alcohol, panic, stupidity.
Summing up the case, the judge accepted that Sabu had not intended to kill and sentenced him to 24 years in prison.
The judge on sentencing Christian Sabu said this: Mrs. Graves' head injuries were so severe, her maximum survival time would have been less than an hour. This was a sustained attack, and the terror and trauma for her in the final few minutes of her life is unimaginable. You had gone to those premises intending to burgle them, to steal from a safe you believed contained a lot of money. You took with you the hammer. You say you had been told the owners were away and therefore were unaware that Valerie, her mum, her sister and her sister's partner would all be in the house. It appears you entered the house via the patio doors in the room in which Mrs. Graves was sleeping. When you realized your mistake, namely that the room was occupied, rather than simply running away in the hope you couldn't be identified by a woman waking from sleep, you launched this horrific attack on Mrs. Graves, who had been asleep in that room. It was your dishonesty and greed that took you to the house. It was your cowardice and lack of morality that caused you to kill Valerie Graves.
7 years since the murder of Valerie Graves, the village of Bosham is slowly returning to normal. But the crime still lingers over them.
Although this had gone on for such a long time, it was in the forefront of a lot of people's minds. There was always that feeling of who did it. And I'm sure many of the men in the area perhaps felt they might have been looked at.
I mean, I was very glad that he got caught because it meant you can just go back to normal life. Whereas before, you do have this nickel in the background that somebody's murdered somebody from locally, because who else would go there? For a long time, we did think it must be somebody around here. I mean, who else could have done it?
I think the general feeling was one of relief that actually, you know, the chap had been found and the family could get some peace. Also that it wasn't someone in the village. I think that was, you know, even after all that time, I think that was still a bit of a relief that it wasn't a chap living up the road or, you know, someone you may know.
And the family of Valerie Graves can finally try to rebuild their lives.
We have had to endure 6 years of waiting, not knowing if anyone would ever be brought to justice for this cowardly act. Mum was very much loved by our family. She's sorely missed by us all.